The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents The Truth versus Their Truth. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for tuning in today. The other day somebody said something which is a long-standing pet peeve of mine, which is that they needed to be able to tell their truth. And I'm long-standing, outspoken of the view that there's no such thing as their truth or your truth. There is only the truth. And that as soon as you say their truth, you've added a couple extra letters that don't work with regard to truth. And we get into this notion of subjective versus objective in the sense of what is true absent my personal assessment versus what's my subjective truth. Do we have any access to truth, capital T truth, the truth at all, ever? Or is everything in our life just another little subjective notion of truth? Well, there's no easy answer. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye. Oh, that's not the way we do videos. We ask questions and then we try to answer. What if there isn't an answer, though? Like, I'm genuinely asking whether or not I have access to capital T truth is a really difficult issue. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that I don't, and with any degree of certainty, but that what I have is nearer and nearer approximations of truth. I realize the phrasing of that sounded really bad. Nearer and nearer approximations, with a pause there. But what is the truth? And if I'm going to say, here's the truth, and the only thing I can point to is you and I and a bunch of other people agree that this is the truth, have we discovered the truth? So in the course of actually trying to discuss this, I'm going to talk about two different things that are the same thing, even though I called them different things, and that's confusing. And that is an old Indian parable about an elephant and the fallacy of composition. There are people who are like, hang on, didn't you just say we're going to ask the question and answer the question of how do we get to capital T truth? Yes, kind of. Because I don't think we can get to capital T truth, and I don't think it matters, because to whatever we can understand, it is as objective as it could be while there are subjective viewers assessing the situation. The old Indian proverb about an elephant is one that I'm sure many different people have heard. A bunch of blind men happen across an elephant. They have heard of an elephant, but they don't know what it is. They don't know what it's made of. And now they, through their limited resources, are going to try to assess and describe this creature. And so as they gather around the elephant, they're standing in different places, and each of them touches a different body part. And so the individual who touches the trunk of the elephant says, oh, this being is like a really thick snake. And someone else had reached an ear and thought, this felt a little bit like a fan or maybe a bat's wing. Then somebody else was on the leg and it felt like a pillar. Somebody else was, touching the side. It felt like a wall. Somebody else grabbed the tail and it felt like rope. And that was how they chose to describe the elephant. Now we'll get into fallacy of composition in just a minute, but it's a curious thing for me to say that none of them were technically wrong, provided you assume that their descriptions were taken as metaphor or simile, that and this creature is like a wall, this creature is like a snake, this creature is like a fan. And so that's the individuals describing what they experienced as best they could, given their limited understanding, vocabulary. And so to some extent, and in the right context, what they said was true. Not just subjectively true, not just their opinion true, not just their experience true, but objectively true. If we analyze what's actually happening there, which we do, as the person who sat there listening to this story, That's what you're doing. You're saying, I understand. The first person walked up to the trunk and said, this creature is like a large snake. You, as someone who has envisioned and perhaps seen and perhaps touched an elephant, can imagine someone walking up, grabbing the trunk, and feeling its texture and its movement and the fact that it's animated and part of a living thing, and go, I understand how that person with that limited interaction can perceive this being as a snake. I know how and why they got it wrong. And so you look at it and say, this is their truth. Well, what they described was true. And it's true absolutely and independent of their assessment, which is to say, if you are unable to see the entirety of the elephant and you are only given the option to inspect its trunk, and you cannot see but feel, you can feel the musculature, and it would be, at least within the bounds of reason, to describe it as snake-like. Does that mean it's just a subjective truth? No. But if the person went on to say that I know I felt a giant snake, well, they would be objectively wrong. And we can understand how they could subjectively come to that sort of conclusion. But when they're describing the elephant, they're correct. And what they're saying is the truth. And the same is true for all the others. Now, the tail might be a bit of a stretch in that I don't think that it feels so much like a rope. I think it feels more like a tail, but you could look at that scenario the same way. The fallacy of composition is when one wrongly assumes that the whole of something is identical to individual parts. Like if a tire is rubber, and you conclude that, well, a tire is part of a car, therefore a car is rubber. More common, one of the most common, is human beings are conscious, and human beings are part of the universe. Therefore, the universe is conscious. And we are a way for the universe to know itself. Except that's not really true. If you were to make my entire body the universe, we would be the rough equivalent of an atom in a toenail, an expendable one at that. And I don't think an atom in a toenail is a reasonable way for me to know myself. It's not quite the way it works. And yet people want to look at it and say, I've seen consciousness, therefore we're going to go ahead and reach this conclusion that the universe is in fact a conscious mind, that we're all sharing this, despite the fact that the evidence doesn't show that. Fallacy of composition is common when we get into those areas where we don't know. We're going to extrapolate, and we do this for a reason. We can't be absolutely certain about anything. Today is pretty much the same as yesterday. Tomorrow is going to be pretty much the same as today. That is why inference and induction work. That inductive reasoning is generally reliable, but not absolutely reliable. The inferences that we make, that process, which is science, by the way, uses deductive reasoning to lead to inferences about the general. But we don't just say that this property, being a part of the whole, is also a property of the whole. That's where we make a mistake. And yet, all the time, with regularity, someone will email me and say, well, I agree to disagree. Okay, I agree that we do disagree, but the people who tend to say, let's agree to disagree, just want out of an argument because their side can no longer produce any evidence or any reason to think that it's true. And so what they're really trying to leverage there is, well, I have my truth and you have your truth, and there's no way to tell the difference. Except that's not often true. For example, if my truth is that the Earth is an oblate spheroid and your truth is that the Earth is flat, one of us is way more right than the other one. And calling it your personal truth or saying I agree to disagree doesn't in any way change that. You can have the most bizarre, absurd beliefs that your conscience will allow you to hold, and you don't get to call them true. All right, I'll take that back. You can call them true, but there's no good reason anybody should accept that they're true. And living in the modern world where you have claims of fake news and everything's false and nothing is true and it's all a conspiracy and so-and-so's got control, all it's doing is ramping up the ability for individuals to suggest that they have their own personal truth and that their own personal truth is just as valid as your truth or our truth. And that is simply not true. It's never true. If in fact somebody's subjective, personal view of the truth is truthful and accurate, then it should be easy for them to demonstrate this such that we can recognize that it is in fact a part of our truth. If somebody comes along a body in a mansion, now their truth is that there's a dead body there. If they go and get help and come back and the body's gone and we can find no evidence of it, doesn't mean they were wrong, but it means that we don't have a good reason to think that their truth or the thing that they were proclaiming as true is in fact an accurate model of reality. Not everything that we say is subject to likely investigation. There are some things for which we're just not going to have good evidence. And the right position on those is to acknowledge that we don't have sufficient evidence for us to conclude that this is true or likely true, but that we have enough reports of it to keep it kind of tacked up on the board there saying, whenever there's more evidence, this becomes believable. So when people talk about the truth versus their truth, only one of those two things is something that I would consider true in the broader sense. And to whatever extent their truth is true, in order for it to matter to others, it would need to be demonstrable so that it becomes a part of the truth, the universe. And if it's not, then we don't just say, that person's, a credulous buffoon. They may be, they may not be, but that requires additional work. So just like the many different people standing around describing an elephant, they weren't describing an elephant. The parable is framed in such a way where this is obvious, and yet we overlook it. Because the point of the parable is to not apply your subjective view of the world in a broad sense and claim that your experience is the truth. Because you're only seeing a small part of things. If we work together, that's where we built the part of reality that we agree on. Reality, it's been said, is what doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. That is a far more prescient analysis of truth than you've got your truth and I've got my truth bent. Because it's just true. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.